Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of three amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And if you can't tell, we are actually missing our guy, Wes Davenport. We didn't have the sweet intro. Listen, I'm pretty tech savvy in my old age, Omari, but last time we recorded without Wes, I tried to do the intro and go live and local recordings. I screwed it all up. I think I had my mic muted or something on top of everything. So I told Omari, we're just going to go live. We're just going to rock with it. But this just shows you how important Wes is to the show. Guys, we changed the recording time. The weather's not great out here in Kansas this morning, a little bit icy. I got to get on the road later today. So we changed the schedule up. And so if you're joining us live right now, we appreciate it. We are taking some questions for a mailbag at the end of the episode. So drop those in the comments anytime throughout. We'll try to get to as many as we can. If you're listening to it later, of course, we always appreciate you. Sorry if you planned on joining us live this afternoon. It's just the way the schedule worked out. Omari, I got to ask though, the Detroit Lions NFC Championship game, I almost had to mute you, my guy. Like, I love you to death. And you're one of 4 people on Twitter that I have notifications for, right? Where it pings me when you tweet something. And I'm like, I don't need a Lions play-by-play from Omari during this game. But I appreciate
You did need the Lions play-by-play.
I did not.
You did.
Listen, here's what I want to say, and then I'll let you cook. I am dreading a potential Lions-Chiefs Super Bowl, and not because I don't want to see the Lions in the Super Bowl. I would just legit have to stay off Twitter for almost a month if that happened, the 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl and the 2 weeks after. So at the end of the day, I almost don't care if they both don't make it, if one doesn't make it. But if we get a Lions-Chiefs Super Bowl, I'm going to have to check off Twitter for at least 4 weeks.
I won the Lions-Chiefs Super Bowl because the Lions beat the Chiefs and got absolutely destroyed by Baltimore. I'm not saying that's rubbing in your face, I promise. Because at the end of the day, the Chiefs are Pat Mahomes. And I'm sure I'm speaking for the vast majority of the Lions fan base when I say I did not see this coming. I never see any degree of Lions success coming. Like, I learned when I was young that you can never put too much confidence in this team because they could start 6-3 and miss the playoffs. They could, like all sorts of stuff. They could be leading a playoff game, but they get screwed by calls. Like, you just never know. It still hasn't hit me that they're in the NFC title game. Like, that's just not a sentence you ever say as a Lions fan. And everything at this point on really is just gravy, but it's also like, if they've already made it this far, you might as well just go out and win a Super Bowl, right? So I'm rooting for that Lions-Chiefs rematch. The Chiefs would be a lot healthier. Travis Kelce back. I think he just tied the record for, or is like second all time in like playoff touchdowns or something.
So he's like second behind Jerry Rice in everything. Jerry Rice. Receptions, yards, touchdowns, and then him and Mahomes broke the record of Gronk and Brady.
Yeah, and that'll be a much different game the second time around. So I'm rooting for your Chiefs. Of course, I want to see the Lions take this as far as they can, and it'll be great content for the pod too. And that's like secondary or lower on the list of reasons why I want that match. But it is still on the list of reasons.
I don't think it will be. Like, you don't understand. I'm very even keeled. I'm not emotional whenever we talk about the Pistons, the NBA draft. That is not the truth about the Chiefs, Omari. Like, I am very irrational, emotional. Like, the Chiefs
That's
already.
What we need.
No, we do not. The Chiefs already catch strays from Lions fans. Like, all year, I had people, just randomly crushing Mahomes and different things. I'm like, why are the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes catching strays from Lions fans right now? So listen, I would almost rather the Lions make the Super Bowl and the Chiefs not than they make it together. Like, I'm not sure I can live with that. But, shout out the Lions. Yeah. We get a comment here. Hello, guys. What's up? Good morning. I don't know. Maybe you're somewhere else. So good afternoon. We do have some ratings and reviews we got to get to, Omari. We didn't get to them last week because we had our guy Keith Smith. Hey, also, the NBA needs to pay us to go live because it wasn't a Pistons trade this time, but there was an NBA trade that happened legit right before we started recording where Kyle Lowry and Terry Rozier got traded along with a first-round pick going to the Hornets in that deal. But a few ratings here. This is from Mike Macheski. He said, let's keep it going. The last 2 Pistons podcasts I listened to have both ended, so I need you guys to break the curse and keep this thing rolling. Great, knowledgeable takes and never a bummer to listen to, which is tough when you're talking about the Pistons. Highly recommend for fans of Detroit basketball. Omari, I don't know about you, but I have no intentions of this thing stopping anytime soon.
No, I don't either. I love doing this. I love recording every week with my guys, Bryce and Wes, and we're going to keep this thing going as long as we reasonably can. So no fears there. We are here for you every single week, and we'll guide you through this exciting, for unique reasons, Pistons season.
So this is from Jorge with a bunch of numbers, or George. Love the pod. I really appreciate the work put in as a Cam Whitmore friendly pod, even though the team is trash. I also enjoy the additional Twitter engagement, avidly reading your sports takes. If you want to continue following a truly, truly bad team, this pod is a must listen. Yeah, I feel like we're both pretty good engaging on Twitter as well. Sometimes I have steered more towards just like DMs because I feel like you can have more real conversations through those. Sometimes not everything gets portrayed right just whenever you're in comments and quote tweets and stuff like that. But I see you engaging with fans all the time as well. So I feel like both of us do a pretty good job engaging on Twitter.
Yeah, I've always tried to do it. I just know when I was in high school, and I always enjoyed reporters engaging with fans and answering questions or talking smack or whatever. So I've been trying to cut the smack talk out. It's just, there's better ways to spend time, but I enjoy doing that, and I know we have a lot of listeners on Twitter as well. And even when I did my mailbag a couple of days ago, there were people who were like, love the pod, which it's just always great to see that as well. So you haven't been on Twitter as much as of late, and I'm trying to be more like you, if we're being 100% honest here.
Yeah, it's not like I don't want to engage with fans. It's just I have a lot on my plate in terms of, because of game theory, I have to watch general NBA. I watch a lot of NBA draft. As some know, like I have some other things going on that's not media related in this world and space. And so like a lot of times, Omari, I don't watch the games live. I've watched every second of Pistons basketball still this season, but a lot of times I'll just download it off Synergy and then watch the game the next morning. So, it just is what it is with that. Last night I did get to watch it live, and that was kind of nice. And so I threw out a few tweets during the game, but that's most of my engagement is I'm just not watching games live quite as much.
And that's understandable. You're not missing a whole lot, since the Pistons aren't having too many games come down to the wire. So efficiency first, right?
Yeah. And then we have one final one here. This is from Maize and Blue. Said, only Pistons podcast I listen to. Fan since day one. Keep up the great work. Signed Maize and Blue 313. So, and it said the best there is. So appreciate all the comments. I always love the ones that have been here since day one. Day one was a long time ago now, Omari, 105 episodes, 106 episodes ago. So really appreciate everybody that's been with us from the start, and even some going back to the Motor City Hoops days. But that's quite the intro. Let's get into this first part. We're going to talk kind of about the backcourt of the Detroit Pistons real quick as we sit here Tuesday morning. Any updates on Cade Cunningham? I know you get asked this question all the time, but at the end of the day, this is what fans are really concerned about, worried about, want to know. Any sort of updates, just the last update we have on Cade.
Yeah, I would expect him to be back either Wednesday or Saturday. This week, they only have 2 more home games this week. Last practice we were at before the last one, I think it was last Friday or Saturday. The official return window was 5 to 7 days. So expect him back pretty soon. And then with him also, Monte Morris, I think, will be back pretty soon as well. So the Pistons are approaching full health for the first time all season. And, I think it'll be fun to kind of see it. I know we're going to talk some backcourt here soon, but it'll be fun to see how that backcourt shakes out once they do get to that point and see whose minutes are cut into at that point.
Yeah, let's talk about the backcourt, because with Cade Cunningham out, Jaden Ivey has taken on what seems to be a bigger role, a larger role, all of that. So what have you thought about the play of Jaden Ivey? And we'll build in from that in terms of, is it sustainable? Do we like it? Like maybe not everybody is impressed by it as what I am or others. Maybe you are. And then we'll talk about, can that work well with Cade Cunningham and kind of the rest of this roster? So let's just start with, how has Jaden Ivey played? What have you been impressed by, if you have been, with his play over the last couple of weeks?
Quick aside, good morning, Mom. She's in the chat this morning. I've been impressed by Jaden Ivey. I think to see what he did at the beginning of the season where he was finishing better, and then now to maintain that while also seeing his playmaking improved in more of a lead role. His assist to turnover ratio is above 2-1 now. With Cade out, I think it's like 6.3 assists, 3 turnovers in the 7 games without Cade. And what really has stood out this season is his rebounding, specifically his offensive rebounding, where he's
Yes.
just crashing the boards extremely hard. And I checked cleaning the glass for an Ivy story I wrote on Sunday. And I believe he's like 99th percentile for NBA combo guards as far as rebounding. Like he's literally been the best out of all the hybrid guards. Cleaning the glasses designations for positions are a little wonky because they have Cade as a wing and kind of goes more by lineup combinations than maybe role. But regardless, as far as guards, Ivy's been absolutely top tier as far as that. And it's actually generated a good portion of his offense just off of the putbacks. Or we saw in Milwaukee, he would grab rebounds and then draw fouls right after. Sort of the downside to that is that his free throw shooting has slumped to like 60% in that same stretch, which, of course, is not ideal. But as a whole, I think we've seen him be a little bit closer to the player he was as a rookie, where you see him attacking downhill, like really wreaking havoc in transition. But along with that, just his improved finishing, but also just inside the arc as a whole, he's been significantly better than last season. And the shooting still has to come around, but at the very least, you want to see him be efficient, getting downhill, and he's done that. And that's been really good for him, and I think will be really good for the Pistons once they do get Cade back.
Yeah, so Caleb says, "Do you guys wait for trade news to go live?" LOL. And then hopefully Ivy's play means we won't go near Lowry, D'Lo, or Murray. It sounded like the Hornets were going to try not to buy out a Kyle Lowry and see if they could continue to move him on to another team. But yeah, listen, I think Jaden Ivey has played really well. I've been a huge advocate of him in his game. I'm glad you brought up the offensive rebounding. So I broke his game down into, or the season into, 3 segments, 13 games. And then I don't have last night's into this, but I don't think it would change it a whole lot. So essentially 13 games. First 13 games of the season, Omari, 1 offensive rebound per game. The second 13, 0.7 offensive rebounds per game. And then over the last, 12 in these stats, 2.4 offensive rebounds per game. That's just not minutes going up, Omari. Like that doesn't make that big of a difference. Like, yes, his minutes went up 5.5 per game from those first 13 games to the most recent, but there was a concerted effort there. Like, I don't know if this was part of what Monty was trying to get him to do. I don't know if something just, switched and clicked for him, but he is a menace on the offensive boards. And honestly, he's the archetype of guard that can be, because he's so athletic, so quick twitch, and it's very, very impactful. Like maybe this isn't something that is really sexy to people, but when you have a guy that is this talented in every other area, but then he adds something like this on top of it, to me, that really makes sense and is really impactful. And also defensively, I don't know that the numbers really show it, but I feel like he's been getting more blocks on defense as well. Like
He has been.
There's some defensive things, Omari, that I'm really encouraged by just with his second effort. It seems like he doesn't get beat quite as bad. Off the ball, 1 time a game, he's going to give up a backdoor bad where he's just ball watching. But seems like there's multiple efforts on the ball. Even if he gets hung up on a screen, he continues to play through it and get back. And so I've actually been encouraged by his defense as well. I think we have at least seen improvements on that end of the floor.
No doubt. So I've cleaning the glass up now, and we could touch on the offensive rebounding first. It's interesting to see it increase to that degree almost overnight, and to me, it really shows that it was an effort thing. But I think more so than that, I think when players get into the league, really athletic players like Ivy, there's a period of them figuring out how to apply that athleticism in the NBA game, which of course is a lot faster, more physical, and you're using that the best athlete on the floor. All teams have plus athletes, so it's not like you're at Purdue where you're in like the slow plotting Big Ten and you could just kind of tear everybody up. To me, that shows that the game is slowed down and he could just track the ball and get to it right. Like game slowed down and he's processing that aspect of it better. But what's interesting is that as a rookie, his offensive rebounding percentage on field goals was 3%, which was in the 80th percentile.
Okay.
And this year it's 5.1, which is in the 96th percentile. So he was already pretty good at it last
Yeah.
season,
Okay.
which I don't think stood out. But
No.
to go from, I mean, to increase that percentage by 2.1 points is insane, obviously. And now he's pretty much toward the top of the list for guys at his position. Like Amin Thompson, Dennis Smith Jr., and Jeremy Sohan are the three players in front of him in that category. And Sohan is like not even an actual combo guard. He's
Yeah,
more
the,
of a
the, the
forward.
only reason he's considered a guard is because the Spurs tried this crazy thing playing him at point guard that they've now since given up on and
Yeah.
actually play Trey Jones. So like he almost doesn't even count.
Yeah, so really it's just Amin Thompson and Dennis Smith Jr. And Thompson has not played a lot for Houston, and Dennis Smith is a backup guy. So you have Ivy doing this in a significantly larger sample size. And he's ahead of guys like Markelle Fultz, Dyson Daniels, and Drew Holiday is actually number 7 in offensive rebounding. So I think just as far as the company you're in, that's pretty good since a lot of these guys have good reputations on defense. Dennis Smith has been good on that end. Amin obviously is an incredible athlete. Drew Holiday, we don't need to talk about how good defensively he is. That's like his bread and butter. And Ivy's unique in the sense that he is way better at blocking shots than like stealing the ball, which is just really kind of odd for the guy who's 6'4". But like his steal percentage has been steady, right? Like 1.2%, which is below average. But he's had some really impressive blocks. Like he rotates, he gets up there, he chases guys in transition. That really is a part of his game that I think can become a mainstay. And then you combine that with, again, just his improved finishing. He's 65% at the rim this year. Last year he was 55. So actually he's still average at the rim, but it's just better than being below average because he generates so many opportunities there that, like I think you could live with that. He's one of the best at getting downhill and generating those opportunities. So he's just a weapon. I asked Monty about him last week, and he just said he sees Ivy and Cade as weapons, right? They do different things on the court, and it'll be fun to see how, now that Ivy's more of a co-starring role handling the ball, how he kind of taps into that and how Ivy can make Cade's life easier.
Yeah, and I want to talk about how they work together in just a second. But your mom says, I think in general, the Pistons are improving, and Sasser was awesome last night. Yeah, like we're probably not going to give Marcus Sasser the love he deserves because it wasn't in the outline. And we could pivot just a little bit. We may find some time. We kind of wanted to dive into Jaden Ivey. Before we talk about him and Cade together, is this sustainable? Can they work together? All of those things. I also want to give him some love for the nuance on his drives. I think people think Jaden Ivey and they just think explosive downhill driver. That's it. There's not a whole lot else to his game. There's other examples of this from other games, but just in the Bucks game on Monday night, he had a possession where instead of recklessly challenge Lopez at the rim, which a couple other guys tried to do and weren't successful and just isn't a good idea in general, he stops. He played on 2 feet. He pivots. He fakes. He got Lopez a little bit off balance. He got to the free throw line. I think the next possession, then he comes off the ball screen. He gels the defender, which puts him on his back, what I call gelling the defender. Goes into a floater. He misses it, but it was good process. But he got the offensive rebound like we've been talking about, got to the free throw line. And then he had a crazy deceleration Euro step later in the game where he was just able to stop his momentum, Euro step to create the angle. Like, I just think that he has really improved in that stuff. Like, it's, yes, is there some bad process? Is there some bad decisions? We saw it in the second half. I think he's taking too many threes right now, especially off the dribble. But I think we've seen improvement and growth, and that's what you want to see. And one final thing, Omari, before I ask you about him and Cade together, some of these misses also lead directly to Jalen Duren offensive rebound putback. So I realize that's not an actual stat that maybe shows up in the box score, but some of these misses, they come off soft. The big man comes over to contest, and Jalen Duren is cleaning those up, or, Wiseman, whatever big man is on the floor. So again, I've sung his praises. I'm all in on Jaden Ivey and a Cade Cunningham backcourt. Where are you at in terms of sustainability of these two guys playing together and all of those type of things and questions?
So the main issue for me is just the shooting. Ivy is shooting worse than he did last season. Cade has been where he's been at pretty much since day one, where he can knock them down, but the percentage still isn't quite where you would like it to be. And that's probably the one thing that makes me wonder the extent that teams just be able to kind of play off them a bit. But they're not going to give Cade open threes. I mean, regardless of the percentage, they're not going to give him open threes. And Ivy, you can't really give too much space because you can just blow right by you. So I think it could be a really fun combination. Just to have a guy in Cade who could really get to his own shot. He's got the tools to be a really good defender, probably the superior playmaker to Ivy. And Cade's rim pressure numbers are actually pretty solid this year. I think he's like above average at getting to the line, which is a pretty big improvement from last season where he couldn't buy a foul. Some nights, like he's had nights this season where he's had 10, 11, 12 free throw attempts, which is a pretty big improvement for him. But the main thing to me is just, like coming off of last season, we saw what Ivy could do with the ball, and we're halfway through the season, and we're just not getting to the point where we can do that. So we know Cade can make Ivy's life easier. What extent can Ivy make Cade's life easier? The driving kicks to get Cade open shots, or maybe you get the ball and you immediately attack. Cade, like I looked at cleaning the glass, he is self-creating like more looks than almost anyone else in the NBA, and he may be number one. So people talk about his efficiency, and that's actually going up a lot since early in the year. But even with that, he's had to work really hard to get to his offense with a lot of mid-range shots. And I think with Ivy on the floor, initiating more pick and roll, pushing the ball in transition, you get Cade easier buckets, which in turn helps both players. So that's something that they should be leaning into. And I think the last week and a half has showed that last season wasn't a fluke for Ivy, and he really is a primary guy that just brings a completely different look compared to Cade.
All right, we got to go to a short break, Omari. When we come back, I want to stay on this for just a little bit. So let's go into this. I have some numbers on Jaden Ivey that I find interesting. I want to get your thoughts. We'll touch on that, and then we'll get into the new Pistons, Muscala, Gallo, what that maybe means, not necessarily long-term. Obviously, those guys aren't long-term players, but is there a little shift in roster construction and how they're looking at big guys? We'll talk about all of that right after this short break.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we're going to talk about the Mike Muscala and Danilo Gallinari.
Hold on, I want to do Jaden Ivey just a little bit more.
Okay. So we will stay on Jaden Ivey for now, but then we will talk about the duo that has transformed Pistons basketball. And I'm only exaggerating a little bit.
Yes, it is interesting, though. I think we may be able to have a takeaway from it. So I looked at Jaden Ivey's numbers, October, November, then December, then January. His touches, especially if you factor in minutes played or minutes per game, is essentially the same. He had 46.3 if you factor in minutes per game in October, November, 43.4 December. He's at 48.6 right now. What has changed is he has more drives per game right now. He actually has more catch and shoot, and this is all via NBA.com. And his seconds per touch is up by almost a second per touch. But what I found interesting was it wasn't that he was getting that many more touches, Omari. It's just that he's being more aggressive. He is holding the ball just a little bit longer, but I think he's just being more aggressive with those touches. And so this actually gives me hope that when Cade gets back, he can still get this many touches as long as he keeps this mindset, this mentality, and this aggressiveness with those touches. I think these guys can really play together. I think what you said is really important. Cade definitely makes Ivy's life easier because I think Ivy can come off zoom actions and off-ball cuts. We talked about the offensive rebounding. I think he can do all that. And if you want to play with the ball in his hands, you can stagger him into the second unit. We saw in the game last night in the second half where maybe it was a little much for Jaden to have that much of a load on him, where it would have been nice to have Cade there. How much will Cade flourish, Omari, or could he flourish from what Jaden Ivey does? I think that's what's huge is, can Jaden Ivey pressure the defense, kick to Cade where he knocks down a catch and shoot or attacks the closeout, those type of things. Like how comfortable is Cade playing off of Ivey is ultimately, I think, what makes the difference. And because of Ivey's shooting and to an extent Cade's, you do have to have floor spacing around those two.
Yeah, I think it can make Cade's life immensely easier. Just to have a guy who's elite getting downhill. Like Ivy's percentage of shots he's fouled on is like 99th percentile, which is, I think it hasn't stood out as much just because, especially early on, he wasn't playing as many minutes, but he really has become one of the NBA's like premier players at getting downhill. And the stuff for him is just improving at the rim and at the free throw line a little bit. But Cade just does not get many easy looks at all. And I think along with that, you see that it typically takes Cade a little bit to get going. Like he'll shoot like 2 for 8 in the first half. And it's like, and then the second half he'll go like 9 for 11, and it's like, oh, okay, there we go. But can you make K's life easier early on when he's probably taking a lot of mid-range jumpers, and you could have Ivy initiate, get K some open threes. I think K's 3-point percentage could increase a good amount, not having to self-create as much, and I could help get him into a rhythm pretty early. Um, and I also just like that Ivy is such a different player as well. Like if you
Yeah.
had two Cade Cunninghams together, you probably still be fine, but you're still missing, I think, that athletic element that drives all the offenses now. Obviously, James Harden has always been a lead at getting downhill and generating those looks. Tyrese Maxey has done that really well for Philly this season, and has certainly been their second most important player after Embiid, who had 70 last night. Like I had to throw that in there because it's just absurd. And 18 rebounds. And you made a good point just looking at the touches for Ivy, because I think his role this season, even early on, has probably been a bit more evolved than it seemed, just because his role has been decreased from last season. But I checked, and like Kate, like Ivy, of all the guards on the roster, like Ivy by far spent the most time alongside Kate this season. And I think it's less the actual time on the floor and more so how they're being utilized together, where previously it was more so having Ivy attack off ball, cut and whatnot. And now it's going to be more you have Muscala or Stu or Durant coming up at the top of the key, like setting screens. Now you could put Cade in the corner, and Cade's probably overall a little bit better to have in the corner, I think, some plays, just because of his overall more versatile game. And if he steps into a mid-range shot, I think you're pretty fine with that. So there's a lot of upside there. And with roughly 39, 40 games left from this point on, I think you really need to see what those two guys can do together, and if Ivy can be more of like that secondary primary guy next to a Cade Cunningham. Because if you have that, then I think that solves a lot of issues for you going forward, as far as just whose offense is this, and like, can we build around these two guys and feel pretty good about it?
Especially if you have the floor spacing, right? I'd be interested to know how much of their time together was spent with Asar and Duran also on the floor. And I know this is where some people have called out the young core and how they all gel together. Like maybe they don't gel together in the same lineups, but that doesn't mean that they can't all still be a part of this. Just if one of them has to come off the bench, or you have to stagger them a little bit. But with Duran being a non-shooting big, Ivy having some questionable shooting, although I still long-term believe in the catch and shoot, you really need a 3 and 4 man that can space the floor. So let's talk about the additions of, I don't even know if they're 4 man, they're mostly 5 men. They can play the 4 a little bit, but of Mike Muscala, Danilo Gallinari. This trade went live like it couldn't have went better. If you haven't listened to this, we had Keith Smith live last week when this trade broke. I also thought about this, Omari. Remember that your computer kind of crashed? We would have been 30, 40 minutes into the episode if that wouldn't have happened. So whatever your computer did that day, it was looking out for us, because we would have been way too deep into the episode. It would have kind of messed things up. The timing of all that was perfect. My question is, they trade Marvin Bagley, who they, not crazy assets, but they sent out assets to acquire and gave a contract to. Then they traded Sadiq Bey for James Wiseman. So they send Marvin Bagley out. They bring in, or they trade for Bagley. Then they send him out. They trade for Wiseman. Now Wiseman isn't even playing over Muscalo or Gallo. Are we seeing an organizational shift in terms of, I'm not saying it's Muscalo and Gallinari, but in terms of this organization sees the need for stretch bigs in that way?
I think so. And I think a lot of it too is just not only the stretch big aspect, but just the having more vets on the floor at the veteran spots who can give you the kind of craft and know-how that they haven't really gotten from that position this season. And the difference has just been so noticeable. Like Mike Muscala being out there at the 5, just the difference between him setting screens and some of the other big setting screens and how defenses react is just, it's like night and day. Like Ivy's just had wide open lanes to the rim. I think they've had a better time generating 3-pointers with Muscala on the floor or Gallinari. And it also helps a lot that those guys have remembered how to shoot again. Like Muscala going 4 for 4 and then hitting two pretty big threes last night. Again, it's just huge for this team. And defensively, he's been more impactful than a lot of people would have guessed. He even admitted himself, like, he's never been that strong on the defensive end, but just him knowing how to rotate, just the effort he's had on that end, I think in many ways has been an improvement for the Pistons. So I think part of it is that maybe once upon a time, Muscala and Gallinari were more so fours, and in the modern NBA, they're more so fives. We did see the Muscala during front court last night, but that was against a Milwaukee team with Lopez and Giannis and Bobby Porter, so you can kind of do that. There's going to be teams where you can't really do that. But even just scheme wise, I think for a point 0.5 offense to really work, you've got to have that shooting. We saw in Phoenix that Monty didn't play stretch fives, and it did open their offense up. So a lot of it, it's not that they're necessarily giving up on James Wiseman, although there's still a few weeks until the deadline. But I think it just shows that they came to an understanding that we have too many skill sets that duplicate each other in that front court. And at the end of the day, Duran is the best at doing the Jalen Duran activities on the team, where like he probably has the best touch around the rim of all the bigs. And of course, just his downhill gravity, his playmaking are things you can't really minimize. Like the Pistons really need those skill sets. So it's just been interesting to see how fast Muscala has gelled with this team, and just how noticeable that difference has been early on. And it's not necessarily the biggest vote of confidence for the center rotation previously, but I think along with that, it also just shows how young this team is, and just there being a need for that type of veteran play.
Well, I mean, those two can barely move,
Yeah.
but they get to the right position because they've played in the NBA for as many years as they have, and they're really good with their hands. Like you can see that Gallo knows where he's supposed to go. He just can't move his feet quick enough to get there. But then he had one last night. It was a foul, but he slapped it away from Brook Lopez. I don't know if it was a pick and roll or whatever, and it went out of bounds. Like they try to make up for it, but even the fact they know where to be, I think you bring up a good point. I want to watch it closer before I'm definitive about this, but it seems like those guys do even set better screens. They probably know the little nuances of how much can I, check with my hip and where can I get away with little things. So I do think you see the difference there. Real quick, guys, in the chat, some of you have put like the same question in. I have them all starred. We will get to that in about 10 minutes. We'll try to get through all the questions you guys have asked. So we really appreciate it. If you're still with us live, drop some of those in there. And then that's all we'll do after our next break. I think, listen, the process that ended up being Marvin Bagley was not good. You traded away assets to get him, you gave him a contract, and then you essentially gave away assets to like get rid of him almost. The process, what it looks like and where it's headed with James Wiseman right now doesn't look good. I'm not defending that whatsoever. Where I have a little glimmer of hope here, Omari, is it seems like maybe everybody is on the same page here in terms of, okay, this is what Monty Williams needs from his bigs. These are the types of bigs he needs. And now we see Troy Weaver maybe going out and getting those bigs. Now, these aren't the long-term answers. I think we both know that. I don't know. Maybe Muscala re-signs on some nice contract and is a backup big for this team. But if those are the conversations that needed to happen and have happened, and Monty can start to get the right types of players around his roster to execute his offense, that's at least intriguing and a step in the right direction for me.
I think so. This season, of course, has been a pretty dramatic wake-up call for more or less every aspect of this rebuild, right? You have to reevaluate everything. And it's clear that the dart throwing, really giving up assets to throw darts on certain guys, has not been a good process. You give up assets to get James Wiseman, who is losing minutes to 32-year-old Mike Muscala. You give up assets for Bagley, and not just give up assets for him, but then pay him a contract that you have to give him more assets to get off of. I think just putting that much faith and confidence in the guys who hadn't previously proven it clearly was a failing strategy, right? Like you were just relying on these guys basically to live up to their draft position or just their pedigree coming out of college. And a lot of those guys just don't have the same careers in the NBA, and just the process there has not worked out. So we are seeing a pivot now. Muscala and Gallinari, of course, are on expiring contracts, and they wanted to open up that $60 million in cap space, just because I believe the front office is operating with the assumption, not the assumption, more so the belief that having the cap space now ready to go puts them at an advantage over teams who are more so like, well, we could clear that cap space later. Like, no, we have it now, so we're ready for action now. We have all these expiring. So what that becomes down the road TBD. Obviously, they have to nail more trades from here, but in the short term, just upgrading the experience level for those young guys in that backcourt. I'm sorry, in that front court, and just having that general know-how and experience has already helped this team this season, even if it hasn't produced any wins yet. To go, back-to-back competitive games against the Milwaukee Bucks. You played Minnesota pretty well, and then immediately after the trade, of course, you defeated the Wizards, which those two guys weren't on the team yet. But I think there's been a noticeable shift for this team in the last week, where arguably they just played their best week of basketball since week one, where they won two of those first three games. So slowly, but somewhat surely, you're seeing the needle move in a better direction for this team already.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just from me watching, I'm like, okay, this looks better. It seems like it makes more sense. Obviously, there's some like guys are making shots. Alec Burks has been on a heater, with
Mhm.
his shooting, his scoring off the bench, all of those things. There's some really cool stats with him. Most three-pointer made by a bench player since December 15th, fifth in scoring off the bench since Christmas break. That was before the game last night. So some of that is that. But also, I just think maybe things are starting to gel, come together. Should it have taken this long? I don't know. I've never been an NBA coach, worked in an NBA organization. Maybe this is how it goes. So I still believe in Monty. This is from I America. And yeah, like I've seen some things that are intriguing. We still haven't necessarily seen the 0.5 offense that I was thought, or maybe it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I do think Monty runs some really nice sets. There's a lot of times in the game I'm like, oh, he got Boyan wide open right there. Or he'll get a shot for a guy who seems to get it going a little bit. He loves using the shooter as a screener and then
Mhm.
setting a screen for him. So you'll see like Boyan set a back screen and then come off a pin down, or Boyan will set a ball screen and then come off a flare. So I have like some of the sets he's ran. And so, yeah, like I'm not out on Monty. I haven't loved the process, but again, maybe there's a long-term play here that I didn't see, understand, and maybe it'll all pay off. There's definitely been some rotation questions, but we'll see. And we'll see, especially at the deadline, what moves are made. Maybe the roster makes more sense for what he's looking for going forward. We have a few more minutes here. Let's touch on Marcus Sasser, man, because he was really good last night, Monday night. So let's give him a little love. He can score the ball, Omari. Like he's going to be there's going to be some defensive things just because he's so small. Like guys can legit just rise up and shoot over him without him making them feel him because he is smaller. But I mean, when he gets it going, and I don't even think he made a three last night. Was it all from inside the 3-point line? Is that right? Was he 0 of 4 from three?
Yeah, no, I don't think he hit a three last night. It was inside the arc and at the line.
Yeah. So his ability to, create separation and knock down a mid range jumper, get to the free throw line. He scored a nice one in transition. He has more of an all around scoring package than I think what I even realized. Like this is a kid that I think can really play, and I hope those minutes continue for him. A month ago, I thought he was struggling a little bit. They set him for one game, but he's been playing well. I hope these minutes stay consistent.
Yeah, the one thing about Sasser is that he could just get a bucket, and there's nights where this team really needs that, and not just the creation from outside, but inside as well. He was getting to the line well last night. He was 5 of 5 at the line. Pretty early on, he was just like darting, slicing through the lane, and like even with Brook Lopez on the court, there was a couple times where he challenged him and got blocked, but also he got to his floater repeatedly, and you could tell he was just really focusing on exploiting that drop. And him having that in between game already so polished, I think sets him apart from the other guards on the roster. Alec Burks has that, especially when he draws fouls, but maybe Cade and Ivey as Butts are still kind of developing those aspects. And Sasser, like that's his bread and butter, is just slicing through and hitting that floater repeatedly. So we've seen that he can really, really score. It hasn't been consistent, but like when he's on, he's on. And even when Monte Morris comes back, I think you look at his guard rotation and you could say that Sasser is a guy one way or another who should probably be in this rotation. I thought he was solid defensively last night. One thing Monty's mentioned with him is that just because he's on the smaller side, being 6'2", it could be tough to like switch with him
Yeah.
depending on the matchup. And I think that's probably been a scheme mismatch with Monty that is something that he has had to try to solve. But overall, it doesn't like come on, this team has not played good defense anyway. So you could probably live with that if it means that you're getting a guy on the floor who can not only really score, but even with his tendency to over dribble, I think he does see the floor pretty well and like he could set guys up too.
Yeah, I mean, what I would like the Pistons to be able to do is say, "Hey, we're going to switch with everybody but Sasser."
Yeah.
But we've seen their struggles with communication just with off-ball stuff. We've
Mhm.
dove into that in previous episodes. I don't think it's something they could execute. If you had Sasser, Cade, whoever else, Duran at the 5, and you don't want to switch with him, and you say, okay, we're going to switch 2 through 4, but not with the 5 and not with the 1, or if Sasser, quote unquote, the 1. I don't think they could execute that scheme. Big picture, long term, I would love for this team to be able to do some creative things like that, switch up what their ball screen coverages are, depending on who's using it, who's defending it. It just doesn't seem like the communication is there to do that. I will say, I think what gets to Sasser to neutral defensively, Omari, is some defensive playmaking and disruption. We saw him off the ball last game, jump a passing lane, rotating from the weak side, got a steal, that got him to the free throw line. So if he can be super active with his hands, if he can jump some passing lanes, those type of things, that's what these smaller guards, that's where they get to neutral on the defensive end. Yeah, they'll give some stuff up. You don't have as much scheme versatility, but if you can force some turnovers, make guys uncomfortable, then that really adds some value there. So I got to give your mom some love here for tuning in. So she says Sasser's so fun to watch. He has a lot of heart. Yeah, I mean, he plays really, really hard. Again, it's a little more on ball than what I was hoping for, but you can't hate the results of what he's doing scoring the ball. And he's had some good assist games as well. Omari, we got to go to a short break. We have 14 questions to get through. Hopefully we can get through all of them. We will try our very best. We'll dive right into it right after this.
All right, we are back with segment 3, and big thanks to everybody who has sent us a question. We're going to go one by one, and we're
Yep.
going to try to get through all of them, so we're going to have to move somewhat quick. We will lead off with APHT. Ivy ain't going nowhere. Why would y'all say that? I
Did
think
we
it's
say
because of
that?
our. I
Where's
think
that
it's
from?
because our title is Jaden Ivey tracking trades and mailbag. Maybe
Oh,
that
no,
reads as low.
I think there should be a comma
Yeah.
there.
Like, so that's
Or
probably just from that title. No, we're not advocating for Jaden
ah,
Ivey to
our
be
bad,
traded.
our bad.
So we can see how it could come off that way. But no, it's Jaden Ivey, comma, tracking trades, and mailbag. So I know even on Twitter, there's been some people who have been like maybe it's time to trade JI and like sell high. At this point, I think when you win 4 games, like I don't know if you should be eager to move off of your young guys. That's probably more of an off season. Like, okay, we have to extend Cade. We got to extend the beefs too. Like, we got to make some tough decisions as far as who's staying and who's going. So maybe that's a conversation at some point, but certainly not right now.
Yeah, okay. This makes so much more sense because this was
Yeah.
actually the very first comment of the live, and I'm like,
Yeah.
when have we ever said anything about trading Jaden Ivey? I've been the biggest supporter of Jaden Ivey for like 7 episodes. And so I thought maybe you had written it in an article,
Mhm.
just mentioning it or something. So yeah, title's a little bit misleading there. We are not advocating for trading Jaden Ivey at all. Yeah, we wanted to give him some love, which we did the whole first segment. If you're just
Mhm.
tuning in now, make sure you go back and check that. So this one is from Derek Brown. When are we going to get our starting power forward? No good free agents at power forward at the 4, and NBA draft looks bad.
Yeah, so that's a good question because they want to like part of clearing 60 million in cap space was because they want to have enough room to sign 2 significant talents, instead of just one where previously they were around, I think 44 and maybe that's one guy and then like a role player. So they want to be able to basically split that across like either a 30 deal and a 30 deal or 25-35, but you're able to get 2 really good impact players. And so one of those guys could be a starting 4. Who that player would be, I think it's tough to say, but there will be teams who, as we get closer to the deadline, will look to get off of some of their assets to save money. You have the Chicago Bulls, you have the Atlanta Hawks, I think probably being 2 of those teams that obviously need to do something because they're just kind of stuck in no man's land with a lot of big contracts, and especially with the new CBA, that's a bad spot to be in. Um, there's been a lot of focus on free agency with their cap space, but I've said it on Twitter, I've said it on here, I'll say it again. I really do think it's more than likely that they acquire those players through trades rather than free agency. So I would not focus on free agency at all, really, when it comes to the cap space. Like I've seen a lot of who's going to sign here. I don't think that's the plan at all. I think they're aware that if you're not Miami or Los Angeles, it's really hard to swing those types of impact players.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. That's what my initial reaction was, probably via trade. I don't have the name for you
Yeah.
necessarily, so I know that that's not going to answer your question here, Derek Brown, but I think it's probably via trade. I just quickly scanned the 2024 free agent market again, and you're right. Like there isn't a name there. Real quick on draft, we don't have to get into this a lot. Alex Sarr is a guy, like he's an Evan Mobley type of player. I think that's his archetype right now, a little bit
Hmm.
more than like Chet, because Chet's offensive game is at a different level. Obviously, the Cavs, have quote unquote made this work with Mobley and Allen. So depending on your appetite for it, that's potentially, I would like to see him a little bit more of as a five. Zachary Risache is a kid out of France that's like a wingy forward. Like he would be a little bit small for that, especially at his age. Cody Williams, same thing. He's a kid out of Colorado. It would be a little bit later in the lottery to get to like the true four men in the draft. So, you have to acquire another one, trade back, something like that. If you were looking at the draft, there are some guys, but not necessarily guys at the top.
Yeah, I
This
actually got a
one, oh,
question
yeah.
in my Sunday mailbag. Like, is this the right draft to trade out of the pick? And if you fall to five again, then like maybe it is. But there are some pretty good forwards in this draft where if you do decide to stay put there, like Zachary, I think he's a really good offensive prospect. Needs to fill out his frame a little bit, and
Yep.
he's still 18. Like right now,
Yeah.
he'll be
He's
19
young.
on draft night, but that's a guy that I really like as far as just could you see him being like the 3-4 that this team needs going forward, and he does check a lot of those boxes.
We'll talk about him a little bit more. We had a question about him, and I
Mhm.
just wanted to kind of give my Pistons big board whenever we get to this one. So this is again from America. I would like to see Cade moving to a Tatum role and see if Ivy can be our point. Ivy, Asar, Cade, Boyan, and Duran would be what I'd like to see. Again, we've talked a little bit about Ivy being like the true primary point guard guy. What are your thoughts on kind of playing Cade as a quote unquote three? Because this kind of opens some things up in terms of, do you need another guard to add to the starting lineup, or do you need another wing? If Cade, even if it's just defensively, Omari is used more as a three, well, then you can add another guard, and that's technically your backcourt with Jaden Ivey. Where you are at kind of with Cade Cunningham as a three, just in terms of positional fit and the guys around him, not necessarily how much he has the ball in his hands.
Yeah, I think playing Kate more off ball has obvious upside. Like we've seen it even this season. Once they begin to take the ball out of his hands a little bit when he was struggling with turnovers, it did help him. But then he cleaned up his turnovers and kind of went back into being like that mainly on ball guy and has been fine. Tatum still does a lot of initiating for Boston, so they do have a point guard. But if you looked at usage, like I would assume Tatum's usage is probably still the highest on that team. Even when I mean Marcus Smart, like whoever, like I think that Tatum's still a primary guy for them in a lot of ways. So the distinctions are a little arbitrary, but like I get the overall sentiment of just having a table setter, and K is not the guy setting the table every single possession, which with Ivy, I think you could do that most certainly given his speed that we talked about earlier. And, Monty's talked about how unselfish those two guys are. So K doesn't really have Tatum's size, right? Like K is 6'6", and Tatum's like a legit like 6'9". Like we see Tatum in person. There's some guys who look bigger in person than they do on TV, and Tatum's like toward the top of that list. Like there's a pretty significant size difference between him and Cade. So you really can't plug Cade into the Tatum role to the same extent just because there's just some stuff, especially defensively, that he can't provide that Tatum does. But going forward, there probably is upside to taking Cade off the ball a little bit more.
Kyle Metz says, I think moving K to the three diminishes his size advantage, but playing more off ball, the
Yeah.
two would be good for him. I think that's a lot of things like you
Hmm.
just outlined there in terms of a lot of it just has to do with the size. Like he isn't like even just in his shoulders and his upper body, you can tell a little bit of a difference there, maybe even height wise. We had the same trade brought up from two different people. So I don't know if this is like floating around somewhere or whatever. NBA trade season off Twitter, Boyan and Burks to the Knicks for Fournier, Quentin Grimes, RC Diacono, Detroit's, it says 24 first. I assume they just mean removing the protections on that,
Yeah.
and a Brooklyn 2025 second. Motown Og also had this exact same one. My initial reaction, Omari, is the Knicks are giving up way too much in that scenario. And I do like the idea of Grimes. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But Grimes, I mean, I guess that first round pick does have a lot of protections and isn't going to convey for a while. It just seems like a little bit too much from the Knicks.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting Grimes and the first back, and that's the first that the Pistons, I think, initially traded to Houston to get Isaiah Stewart, and then like it's changed hands a couple
Yeah,
times,
it's
but
gone around the league a little bit.
but it's like New York now, and based on Detroit's current trajectory, they're not going to convey that pick anytime soon. So just to get that back, I think would be a plus. But if you're doing that, it's probably the pick or Grimes. I don't think you would get both. Like I think that would just be an absolute no-brainer steal for Detroit. And New York probably doesn't need to give up that much for two expiring veterans. So if you get Grimes, I think that's good. If you got the pick, that's good. But to get both is probably an overpay for New York.
Yeah, I'm thinking like Boyan, you're going to get a first round pick in a just like I think his value is like a first round pick and Burke's value is probably a second round pick, right? Something like that. So that would kind of equate to what you're saying, where Grimes or that first round pick. Like maybe it's not, but that kind of is my vibe. This is from Camille. Would you trade Isaiah Stewart for Dorian Finney-Smith straight up head to head?
I would think about it. So they are different players. I think in some ways Dorian Finney-Smith does fit this Pistons team as a guy who's more of a 3-4 than a 4-5. And along with that, I'm looking at his 3-point percentage, and he's shooting 38.6% this season on 5.4 attempts, which is very, very healthy. 36% for his career, but in the last few seasons, since 2019-20, he is a 37.8% 3-point shooter. So that's really, in a lot of ways, I think the 3-and-D wing that this team really, really needs and has lacked, not just this season, but in years past as well. If you give up Isaiah Stewart for that type of guy, like maybe it's a little bit more of a lateral move, just because I think last night really just showed just how good Isaiah can be defensively. I mean, he comes in like 5 blocks as a career high, but even just outside of the obvious shot blocking, he just had so many plays where he just blew up shot opportunities for Milwaukee with good rotations and just being active. And nobody can shut down Giannis, but I've seen Isaiah defend Giannis enough times to say that he is probably one of the better defenders on Giannis in the league. And we asked him about that last night. He just said it's just about wadding up and drawing a line because he's going to get his shoulder into you and be physical. And you probably get more of that from Stu than you get from Dorian Finney-Smith. So is that a no-brainer trade for me? I don't know if it's a no-brainer, but I do think that's something you would have to consider just because Dorian Finney-Smith really fits this roster extremely well.
So my initial reaction was kind of no. Like, I don't think that's a huge upgrade. Their contracts are relatively the same. Stu's is a little bit longer, but he's obviously younger. But the money is very similar. Finney-Smith, obviously a more proven 3-point shooter on more attempts, like you said. But then the more I thought about it, where this makes sense is exactly what you brought up. If you feel the need to do this because of positional fit and positional value, then I would understand it. So I think there's an argument for that where you get a more of a 4-3 wing forward in Finney-Smith, as opposed to Stu, who we've talked about is more of a 5 that can play the 4 just a little bit. And if you think you have that covered or can easily cover that better than you can with the forward position, then I would understand that. But for me, like by no means is Beef Stew like Cade's the only truly untouchable on this roster for me. I wouldn't want to trade Ivey it would take a lot. And I would like to see Sar and Duran. Stu and Sasser are the next guys on the list for me, just in terms of I would trade them if it was part of something bigger. But in general, I would kind of like to see how they build with this roster coming off the bench. Derek Brown asked about Zachary Risachet. He says he's on that hype to the Pistons. So I was just going to give real quick. We brought up Alex Sarr. He plays in the NBL for the Perth Wildcats. He's currently injured. Risachet, Cody Williams is a wing at Colorado that's real multiple, versatile wing forward that can do different things. Jacoby Walter is more of like a guard wing 2-3 at Baylor that can really shoot it. Ron Holland is a guy in the G League Ignite that a wing that has some explosiveness, hasn't shot it well. And then Matas Buzelis, also in the G League Ignite, came into this season with the rep as a 3-point shooter and floor spacer, struggled to shoot a little bit, but he's a little bit like some of the comps I get. I don't love it, but is a little bit like the Franz Wagner, where he can put it on the deck a little bit and be a little bit well-rounded offensively. Matas ain't going to guard on the ball very well, but has a good feel for the game. Those are some of the names at the top that I think make sense for the Pistons. Nikola Topic is another guy, but he's like a true on-ball guy that I don't think makes a lot of sense for the Pistons.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into draft season a bit here, and I've been diving more into the names that could be available for Detroit at the top, simply because they would be at the top again. So, and it's January, so that's coming up pretty quickly. I like Zachary Reese-Shea a lot. I just think offensively he fits a lot of the archetype the Pistons need. Where I mean, he's just been extremely efficient. He's shooting 47.3% from three. Like the size he brings at 6'9". Needs to put on some weight, still needs to grow into his body a little bit. But he just seems like a guy that like 2-3 years down the road, he could just really be the type of impactful wing that this team has lacked. Like I can't remember the last time they drafted a wing who was just like his strength was scoring. Like it's always been like defensive types who need to develop in some capacity. So there's some intriguing guys. This is not like the strongest draft, but it may be like a 2013 draft for the top 10. It's just like a barren wasteland. But then you see some of those other names really pop up later on. That like Giannis, who was like I think the 10th or 12th pick that year. So this will be a fun one just because it won't be well, if they don't get Wemby, what happens? It's more so here are the 8 guys who could go number 1 and what do they all bring to the table.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think,
So,
like, yes, you want the number one pick so you can make your choice of who you think the best prospect is. But it's a year. If you drop to 3, like, who knows who's going to go? I think who has the number one pick is going to determine who ends up being the number one pick based on fit and need. I think that stuff is going to play into it a little bit more. And the tiers are going to be all over the place with some of that stuff. Corey Tuff's Pistons from Twitter asked, was it the defensive coach that's been out all season? Seems like defensive rotations need the most. We've talked about this a little bit. We're not going to get into it, Omari, but yes, it was Dan Burke was hired kind of as a defensive minded assistant. And, he was left the team after a couple games, has not returned, and they've since filled that position.
Yeah, it's a personal family matter. Like I know that it is, but it's just the organization's kept it private, and I don't think the reason in the grand scheme really matters. Of course they brought in a new assistant head coach to kind of fill some of the role that Dan Burke previously had, which to me illustrates that they're not expecting to get Dan Burke back anytime soon. And we're already halfway through the season now at this point, and he hasn't been seen since like week 2. So, obviously, prayers to him and his family, and hopefully everything's okay. But I would not plan on Dan Burke being back. I don't know for a fact when he's going to come back, so I don't want that to come off as like I know he's not going to come back this season. But the Pistons are moving as though they're going to be without him for a while.
Yeah, and obviously thoughts and prayers with whatever he has going on in his personal life. Caleb says, in my mind, every member of the organization is auditioning to remain with the team next year. What would you need to see from Troy Weaver this year in order to want to keep him for next year? I mean, I'll just say it seems like the organization has decided they're going to let him work the trade deadline and the offseason. And I've kind of talked about this, Omari. If that's the case, I hope that there was a plan presented where Troy showed what his plan was for the trade deadline, for the offseason. That the biggest thing for me is mistakes have been made. You can't deny that. We've talked about the process. Can you show that you've learned from those mistakes? So I think those things can be shown behind closed doors that we're not privy to. And then over the next 6 months, hopefully we will see some of that. We talked about that a little bit with it sucks what they've given up to get Bagley and Wiseman and those guys not even part of this. But if the answer now is we understand that we need some floor spacing in the front court, then that's a step forward, learning from the mistakes that have been made in the past. So that's what I would like to see is, can you show that you've learned from the mistakes that have been made in the past?
Yeah, I think what's tough in this situation with Troy, and I guess I'm thinking more from like the front office or ownership has already decided clearly like he's going to be the GM through the trade deadline. But what could he do at this point that inspires faith?
Sure.
In the season where the team has 4 wins and is on pace for like a historically bad record. It's like you almost want to see something at that point that like really puts this team on like a really positive trajectory before the trade deadline, right? And what kind of deal is that? I mean, I think that's really tough to say. Like, can you turn expiring contracts and no other assets into Zach LaVine? I mean, I think that would be a pretty popular move, even though he's got the injury history, obviously. But if you're not giving up assets, then like probably not as much harm in that. It's tough, I think the answer to that is just entirely subjective. Like me personally, I mean, I really don't know. Like I've kind of viewed I haven't viewed it from like a fan standpoint. I viewed it more from like these are the moves that haven't worked out. So how do you navigate out of this? And a lot of that would just be dictated by what teams are willing to settle for. I think at the deadline, right? If you're Chicago and you're not getting the assets you want, at what point do you just pull the plug and say, let's just take these expirings and at least get the flexibility back, which is still a good deal for them overall, I think, just to get that flexibility. So we'll just have to see. But I think the reality is that you have 4 wins, and realistically, before the deadline, there's probably not much that's going to happen that's going to make this season look a lot better, unless you win like enough games to be better than last season, which at this point you probably have to go 500 the rest of the way. So I don't know if there's a way to really salvage what this season has been, even if you get to like 11 or 12 wins. I think a lot of it from there is just, can you work the offseason in a way that really upgrades the talent floor going into next season? And I think that's an entirely different decision tree from there. Where at the end of the season, if you're Tom and it's like, well, we're keeping Trey, what are the reasons why there? So I think that's very much a TBD for me personally, exactly where that line is as far as the job evaluation.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I'll be doing is I'll probably judge each move a little stronger than I was initially, because I think I justified some of the moves in the past of, well, I don't love this move, doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's not crippling to the rebuild. So I'm not going to make that big of a deal out of it. And I wasn't watching the process close enough as like, okay, this was bad process. This was bad process. This was bad process. And so that's where I think at the deadline, whatever moves continue to happen, like, what was the process? Do I agree with the process of whatever those moves are, whether they're big or small? So, guys, I got to go. I got to get on the road. And so I know there's some questions we didn't get to. Usually we would just run long and it wouldn't be any big deal, but I do have to get on the road today. I got to get to a game this evening. So we are going to cut it off there. One real quick, I'm not very good about this with YouTube. So Brian reminds us, push the like button. So yes, if you're watching on YouTube live right now or later or whatever, hit the like button, help get our episodes out to a wider audience. Subscribe. If you're listening on podcasts, obviously we appreciate you just as much. Continue to rate and review and do all those things. We hit 300 ratings on Spotify. We're like at 227, 228 on Apple, 4.9 stars on both. We appreciate that so much. And that truly does just help us expand and you know, get us out there. And whenever this team starts winning and being better and all of those things, and people just, you know, search Detroit Pistons podcast, we want to be the first one that comes up. So if you like what you're hearing, not only tune in, but please also rate, review, like, all of those things. Derek Brown says best Pistons podcast out there. We appreciate that very much. Thank you so much. Omari, take it away, my guy.
Yeah, I mean, to reiterate Bryce's point, we love to support everything we've gotten. So feel free to hit like and subscribe. It's like a YouTuber. Hit like and subscribe for us so that we can continue to do this podcast that we love. And with that, I'll close this out. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. And also shout out to Wes, who will join us next week. And we'll talk to you all soon.